When do you want me to start? All right, everybody, we're going to get started. Good afternoon. My name is Neera Tandon, and I'm president of the Center for American Progress, and I'm really thrilled to welcome all of you here for this very important day. Before we begin, I want to thank our partners at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, the Kellogg Foundation, and the Laura and John Arnold Foundation for making this event possible and a lot of work possible. The United States is a nation that believes in the ideals of compassion and redemption. And as a people, we cannot allow a single mistake to consign our fellow Americans to a lifetime of poverty. But today, after decades of failed criminal justice policies, as many as 100 million Americans now have some form of a criminal record. In the digital era, even a minor brush with the law can create lifelong barriers to securing a decent home, a well-paying job, or a better education, no matter how long ago that offense took place. That is just wrong. But what makes matters worse, these barriers don't just harm those Americans who have already paid their debt to society. It can hurt their families for years down the road. In fact, CAP has found that nearly half of all children in our country have at least one parent with some form of criminal record. The sad reality is that tens of millions of people with criminal records have the legal right to get their records wiped clean so they can move on with their lives, and yet most find themselves unable to do so. Many can't afford a lawyer or costly court fees, while others aren't even aware that they have the ability to clear their records. It is long past time for our nation to close what has become known as America's Second Chance Gap. That's why CAP is so proud to have partnered with the Community Legal Services of Philadelphia to develop a policy known as Clean Slate, which automates record clearing for people who have remained crime-free for a period of time. Earlier this year, thanks to the incredible leadership of a diverse, bipartisan coalition, Pennsylvania became the first state in America to pass clean state legislation. As a result, hundreds of thousands of Pennsylvanians who have paid their debt to society will now get a true second chance, a second chance they deserve. And I want to thank everyone here today who played a part in making this possible, including State Representative Jordan Harris. Can we give him a round of applause? Today, CAP is thrilled to announce the launch of a bipartisan campaign with more than 25 organizations to bring Clean Slate to states all across the country. Our launch comes at an incredibly important moment, a moment of renewed efforts to pursue criminal justice reform at the federal level. At CAP, we've consistently advocated for sentencing reform that applies retroactively, along with meaningful prison reforms that will not contribute to existing racial disparities. But as we wait to see the latest events as they unfold, we cannot lose sight of the fact that the federal system represents a small fraction of America's criminal justice system, and that's why today's work is so important. In the meantime, leaders at the statewide level have a tremendous opportunity to take major steps forward to passing clean state laws. In a moment, I'll sit down with two people from essentially opposite sides of the political spectrum who are finding common ground across the issue of clean slate. But first, I have the great pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Mr. Ronald Lewis. Ronald has been a champion for Clean Slate since 2014 when he spoke at the CAP event, which helped introduce this policy. His story presents a clear and compelling case for why this initiative is so incredibly vital, and we're grateful for all of his efforts on behalf of this cause. Please give me a warm welcome to Mr. Ronald Lewis.
Hello, how you doing? Hey, how you doing? My name is Ronald Lewis, and I'm here to support Clean Slate. I got in trouble I have 2 misdemeanors from 2004 that haunted me, that stopped me from getting employment, the bare necessity of taking my kids on trips, and my name wasn't my name no more. I was somebody different. I was described as a piece of paper. It's funny because even to this day, people ask me, how did you feel when you got in trouble? I said, I don't know that person anymore. That's 16 years ago. I'm totally different. If you tell me the color shoes you had on that day, I'll tell you how I felt. It's like you move on, but society is not really ready to let you move on. And for me, clean slate is like a glass of water on a hot day. It gives hope to people that have no hope. Regardless how minor or minute the crime is, it's like a life sentence for people. A lot of times people come home, or people that serve jail time or not even serve jail time, it's like a life sentence. You understand what I'm saying? They're not even, they don't see past the wall. So it's now you living, or you're surviving. You're not living, you're surviving. And that's no way to live. You can't survive the rest of your life. So, like I said, clean slate was a glass of water on a hot day for me. And it's that for a lot of people. So.
Welcome David Pluff and Mark Holden to the stage. I just want to thank you both for being here and the incredible work that's happened to this day, and that this day will push forward. I want to thank Ronald Lewis for sharing his story. Just as an introduction, as a longtime advisor to President Barack Obama, David Pluff has played an incredible role in advancing a whole series of policies critical to people's lives. And as the head of policy and advocacy at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, David will serve as a core part of our national Clean Slate campaign. We're also joined by Mark Holden, General Counsel and Senior Vice President at Koch Industries, which played a critical role in getting Clean Slate across the finish line in Pennsylvania. And we are glad to have his and Koch's support, as the Koch Industries support, as our Clean Slate initiative goes national. And just to say, we've worked together over several years on criminal justice reform. And
nice to see you again.
Sometimes we're just debating on television, but here we're agreeing. So I'll start this off, and I think this goes for a lot of people. It's an understatement to say that you two haven't in the past agreed on much and may not agree on that much at the moment, but you've both focused on ensuring that a criminal record isn't a life sentence to poverty. And I guess I really want to just ask you why you think this is so important, why it's important to reach across the aisles.
Who goes first, me?
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Okay. Well, I've never met David till now. I don't know that we probably disagreed, but it's we agreed totally this morning on MSNBC on this issue. You know, I'd say that this is an issue that we worked with you all for a few years on it as well. It's one that speaks to everybody. I think everybody in some way or another is impacted by it, whether they know it or not. And anybody who's ever had a touch with the system never forgets it. And so it's also an issue that has been so overly politicized in a terrible way by both parties over the years, and demagogued about, that everybody has an obligation to fix it, all of us, and we all play a role in that. And when you get down to it, particularly in Washington, everybody goes to their corners and their tribes, and if you're for it, I'm against it. This is one that just makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's really a huge support for it from a moral perspective, a constitutional perspective, and a fiscal perspective. And what we've seen the last 10 years is that states have led the way, like Pennsylvania has done with Clean Slate and some other places. And they've shown that going forward, there are better ways to deal with the criminal justice system than what we've been doing the past 30 or 40 years, locking people up and throwing away the key and being extraordinarily punitive. We think that there's obviously always going to be a need for a criminal justice system that has to have some punishment, but it needs to be redemptive, and it needs to be rehabilitative. And our view of the system is that once you pay your debt to society, which is the whole idea, you break the law, you go to prison, you come out, you should get all your rights back. You should get your life back, what Ronald was talking about, but not be, drag it around for the rest of your life. We think that's hugely immoral, and it makes us less safe, and it ends up locking people out of jobs and opportunities, and hurts their families, hurts communities. There's really not a good argument for it. So from our perspective, it just makes common sense, and it's the morally right thing to do. It's consistent with the Constitution to give people, other chances after they're paid their debt to society. And fiscally, you save a lot of money when you allow people to have second chances and you make your systems less punitive. That's what we've seen the last 10 to 15 years, starting in Texas. And it started with red states, and it needed to start with Republicans, the way they demagogued during the Willie Horton era. But what we've seen is that people come in for the savings and then they stay for the salvation.
Nice. David, do you want to just talk about why why this has been such a priority for you and the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation?
Well, I echo a lot of what Mark said. I think that, by the way, Ronald, he's a Patriots fan. We'll let him slide for that. I'm an Eagles fan like Ronald is. So
5 is more than 1.
That
it's
is
simple
true.
math.
That is true.
Wow.
That is true.
Wow.
So we don't agree on everything.
I can attest that David knows math.
Yes. The 1 counts for 5. In my view. I think you listen to Ronald talk about his journey, and so we know that so many people who engage with the criminal justice system, it happens at a very young age in life. You're a very different person 10 or 12 years from now. So many of those offenses are misdemeanors, nonviolent, but we have a system right now that really, whether it's housing, economic, education, locks people out. And so what's interesting about this, and we're so excited to be part of this coalition, and hopefully we can follow Pennsylvania's lead and want to be as helpful as we can with Mark and you, Nira, and the other coalition partners. We know that there's public support for this, and we know that there's a lot of bipartisan and support across the political spectrum. But that doesn't mean anything if you can't get the policy change, and if then you can't get the right implementation. And there are a lot of technological and data challenges here. So we're both excited about the prospect, but we've got to make the, I think, potential realized, so that, you mentioned up to 100 million people have criminal records. Estimates are maybe up to almost half of kids here in America have one parent with a criminal record. And we know from an employment standpoint, employers who've really taken the step to seek out people with criminal records, it's the right thing to do morally, because we want to live in a full redemptive society, but these are terrific employees, and they're people who are going to add to those companies' bottom line in our economy. So this is something that I think hopefully we can see accelerated progress on over the next couple of years as legislatures go in. And I'm excited because coming out of 16, which was a pretty heated election, the support down at the county level and the state level for criminal justice reform stayed constant. I think there's messages being sent out of Washington yesterday that I think suggest that there's a lot of support at the federal level across both parties for this, which I think can help. But so much of this does have to happen at the state level. Yeah. And so I think what I'm excited about is how do we take the support and the potential. Pennsylvania is a great model, but how do we, as quickly as possible, so we're not on a stage like this 10 years from now. Because ultimately, this is their life, it's their kids' lives, and we have to make progress really quickly.
Yes, I just really want to follow up on that point, which is, it's exciting to have this moment right now, because we've seen action at the state level. We've seen action at a state that's a pretty, almost a bellwether state on a lot of policies. But also, this is a week after the election where there have been a lot of change at the state level, a lot of governors changing. I wanted to ask you both essentially about how you see the opportunities in this moment, given the context of Pennsylvania and national messages, but where you see real opportunities or coalitions that could be formed. Mark, do you want to start off?
Sure. I think that there's great opportunities. You saw yesterday, the news from the White House, where President Trump is on board with comprehensive criminal justice reform. So we've got a prison reform bill that is really strong, based on evidence and data-driven practices. And there are 4 sentencing reforms in there that are really good. And it's called the First Step Act for a reason. It's a big first step, but there's more to come. But at the federal level, it's a huge signal. And it's a huge signal when you have the Fraternal Order of Police on board, who haven't been on board in the past on these issues. And when you have President Trump on board, who ran his campaign on tough on crime. But I think what he's learned over the past 2 years, working really with Jared Kushner, who's done a great job bringing him around on this, is that there are a lot of inequities and injustices in our criminal justice system. And he's seeing that more and more. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity now. I think that really I would say that the era of the tough on crime is going to be more and more waning, and not hopefully in the next 10 or 20 years. I was talking to David, I hope it's, or someone about, I hope it's like where they find these people who didn't know World War II was over after 10 or 20 years, because it is irrefutable what works to make communities safer. And it's things like keeping people out of prison to begin with, diverting them if they're not a threat to public safety. So giving them another, whether it's drug treatment or whatever it might be. And then it's focusing on those who are in prison. So when you get rehabilitated, so when you come out, you don't reoffend and you have a productive life. And so that is what makes sense. And it's impossible, in my opinion, to argue against that at this point, given all the success in the states. And I do think that more and more, what I've learned over the past 6, 7 years working on these issues with on the legislation, that who the public want to hear from the most, believe it or not, are the formerly incarcerated. That's who they listen to. They love those stories. I'm on these panels and I can get out there with data and stats and all this other stuff. But they want to talk about people who've been in the system, and the stories of redemption are so powerful. So I think that gives us a chance as well. I think the fact that the messaging from the White House from yesterday is very helpful. I think that the success in Pennsylvania has been very helpful. I think that when people more and more get close to the system and understand how unjust it is and who gets caught up in it and what happens, that's when the changes have happened and will continue to happen. So I don't even think that this is even really, we need to start talking about bipartisanship. It's just all common sense at this point. And I think that we need to make it much more simple for people to get a second chance and have their slate clean. It should be automatic. Right now, one of the problems in our system is the criminal justice system. We use it so much to generate revenue. You know, we at Koch Industries, a bunch of my colleagues petitioned the Kansas Supreme Court for them to be able to do pro bono cases, both for people underserved in civil or criminal cases. And that was a big deal because they don't allow it under Kansas. And my team, the team I work with, has now been doing expungement days. So we should just make it free. One time when we did it a few years ago, some of the lawyers in Wichita got upset because they make money off of that. We need to stop making money off of this. We need to help people get a second chance, and it should be automatic.
And David, I just want to follow up on that. Are there places you see real opportunity moving forward at the state level that we should be thinking about?
Absolutely. Well, I think obviously, you know, the need to reform our criminal justice system is in a lot of different areas, and you see a lot of momentum. Sentencing reforms, prison reform, changes or elimination of the cash bail system, but specifically as it relates to clean slate. And by the way, so great momentum in all those places, need to see more, but I really do think clean slate's a place where it's really hard, I think, over time here to find how people are going to argue with this. And so I think while we continue to make progress and debate those other issues, I think you're hearing states like Colorado, Michigan, and South Carolina, just to name three, seem like they're going to move forward on clean slate. We ought to look at helping them in every way we can, because I do think you want to show Pennsylvania did it, a few other places did it. Begin to build coalitions, because I agree with Mark. This needs to happen at the local level. The voices need to be first and foremost to formerly incarcerated, so that they build power and they build strength and they have the resources to run these campaigns. So you know, I'd be very disappointed if over the 19 and 20 legislative sessions, we don't have a few more places on the map that you can point to. I do want to underscore the point Mark made, which is so important. This has to be automatic. So California had a ballot initiative back in 2014, Proposition 47. One of the important things it did was reclassify a lot of offenses from felony to misdemeanor, and that could be retroactively petitioned. But only 20% of the people who are eligible, and think about that, the difference between having a misdemeanor and felony could not be larger. But, and a lot of resources have been spent, a lot of great groups working on this. You're only able to reach 20% of the population. So this has to be automatic. Every state may handle it a little bit differently in terms of timeline to make sure that people remain crime-free, but that I think is really important. And then once it's automatic, and that's embedded then in law, you've got to make sure you have the execution side, both in terms of boots on the ground and in terms of the technology to make that realized.
So I wanted to just follow up on something you said, Mark, which is moving the debate to moving the conversation and understanding that criminal justice has to be rehabilitative instead of punitive. And I think really that's been the entire ballgame of this conversation, right? So we went through an era of the 60s, 50s, and 60s and 70s, or like moving through a rehabilitative model that became, there was a political effort to demonize that and really move to punitive. And I'm really encouraged. And this whole partnership has been an encouraging sign of it moving back. I guess I really want to ask you a two-part question, which is how do we guard against making this a wedge issue again by making, taking particular cases and making political hay, which is really at the end of the day attacking the rehabilitative model and making it more punitive again. And then also, how do you, why is that so critical to you? Why has that been, how have you made that, how have you seen other people make that journey on more of the conservative side?
Well, I'll just, I don't know if conservatives want me to speak for them, so I'm just going to speak for myself. But
no, I'm just saying the people you talk to.
The people
you
I
talk to them more than me.
Yeah. I can do some intros for you if you're interested. But
I'm good.
So, I mean, the first part, how do we stop from doing it? I mean, I think what's stopping it is all the successes in the states. So you've got Texas, which people think of Texas, it's hang 'em high or whatever, right? So they started the criminal justice reform there, revolution there back in 2007 with then Governor Rick Perry. And 10 years later, they've closed 8 prisons. They have a crime rate that they haven't had this low since the 1960s. And they've saved $4 billion in taxpayer money. So that's just really difficult to argue against. It's something that makes people safer, saves money, right? Keeps law enforcement safer. So I think facts are our best ammunition against that, the tough on crime people. There's always going to be a one-off where individuals will try to demonize or demagogue it, and that's really unfortunate because this is such a big deal. I mean, one of the government's key obligations to us as citizens to keep us safe, and when our leaders make it into a political game, it's just disgusting. So I think going forward we're going to see less and less of that. There may be some everywhere, here and there. I think that what's really important is what we've seen. It's important obviously to get it right at the federal level. Like you pointed out, though, that's a small component of who's incarcerated, and it's important at the state level. But I think what's really been important the last several years has been the shift for people who are focusing on local races. Because people know who their senator is, they know who their congressperson is, they know who their mayor is, they'll know who their state rep is, but they don't know who their prosecutor is. And that's changed in places like with Krasner in Philly, and Kim Foxx in Chicago, and I know I'm blanking on the name, but someone who's on the panel here today as well. I apologize. Yeah, her. But no, how important that is, that as well. So that's part of it. The second part, as far as how we came to it, it gets back to what I was talking about. I mean, from our perspective at Koch, we're looking at the moral case, the constitutional case, and the fiscal case. And if you look at it from a moral perspective, we are very focused on trying to remove barriers to opportunity for everybody, especially the least advantaged. The criminal justice system is a huge barrier to opportunity. It has been for 30 or 40 years. And, at Koch, this won't shock you, we see a lot of failed big government programs. We see a lot of government overreach. And this is the epitome of the failed big government program, is our criminal justice system. It's a 2-tiered system, and it ends up basically it's a pay-to-play system. As Brian Stevenson says, the rich and guilty get a better deal than the poor and the innocent. So from that perspective, we look at it. We look at the fundamental unfairness of it for someone who pays their debt to society and still can't get back on their feet. They're judged forever what happened on their worst day. That's immoral. The constitutional case, 40% of the Bill of Rights deals with criminal justice issues. I mean, look at bail. We don't really need bail reform because we have the 8th Amendment, but we can get it because of that. Bail is mentioned in the 8th Amendment. It's not an endorsement, it's a warning, right? And the Bill of Rights, the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments lay that out. And the last case, again, is the fiscal case, because when you get to the bottom line, when governors go in who are responsible for their budgets, they have to make changes. They see how much they're spending on incarcerating people, and then that's when the changes come. And as I said earlier, whether it's Nathan Deal or former Governor Markle in Delaware, whoever it is, left, right, everybody comes in for the savings, stays for the salvations. And for us at Koch, we look at it that way. We also look at it in a way from a business perspective. You mentioned the 1 in 3 people with criminal records. We've hired people with criminal records since I started at Koch in 1995. And if you look at that data, we're a global employer. We have 120,000 people around the world. if we were going to say we're not going to look at 1/3 of the potential applicant pool, that's really bad business. And so what we've learned is there's a lot of great people out there who have made mistakes and need a second chance. So all of these facts coming forward are going to help, plus all the technology that David's going to work on to make things even simpler and better.
I wanted to follow up on actually the technology issue because as was referenced earlier, barriers that come with having a criminal record, those barriers are sort of exacerbated by technology because it's so easy to check that issue now. But I wanted to just follow up with you on your efforts to use technology in a way that's helpful. Obviously, automating this addresses the technology issue on one side, but are there ways you think technology could actually be more fundamentally helpful to giving people a second chance and really reforming the criminal justice system?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think you mentioned, obviously, there's a lot of data out there that I think is being weaponized on the punitive side. So from a data standpoint, a product standpoint, a technology standpoint, let's figure out how to make progress on the redemptive side of the equation. Right. So I think that's where hopefully a lot of energy. We're supporting Code for America, which is doing some really great work and analysis about what it would take in a number of states to, you know, when you talk about the policy change, how do you then fully realize that from an execution standpoint? But I think at the end of the day, I agree that it's going to be the stories of those affected who've gone through the system that are most powerful, but I've always believed that that kind of storytelling matched with data. Mm-hmm. So I think there's no doubt, as you talk about data, people who are going to benefit in states like Pennsylvania and hopefully others, and what that means to their family, educational, healthcare outcomes, economic outcomes, I think there's going to be a really powerful story to tell there. Which for the few remaining people that still doubt it, hopefully becomes irrefutable. So this is a place we're very interested in investing in, and I think you know, as we think about some of the best uses of data and products out there, hopefully more of that's going to be aimed at the redemptive side of the criminal justice system. I do want to speak to politics. Mark and I were talking about prosecutors earlier. I mean, I have enough barnacles on me around politics to have gone through kind of the era where, you know, somebody running for district attorney, it was all two people arguing about how tough on crime they could be and how many people they're going to put away. And there's been a fundamental change, really over a short period of time. And I think people right, left, and center, big counties, small counties, talking about approaching that office in a different way that is going to be more redemptive. And so that is a huge, huge change. I mean, even back in the mid-2000s, I don't think you would have seen people either run with that message or be successful with that message. And the reason I think you're seeing that is the public is obviously demanding something different. The market's changed. And so I think what's interesting is I think whether it's somebody running for governor, somebody running for mayor, somebody running for sheriff, somebody running for district attorney, again, in small counties in Kansas or in our largest counties in the urban centers, I think people can run and win. And then the question I think for us is how can we support them? Because again, from the personnel in their office to the technology, the data, a lot. And by the way, you know, local prosecutors don't have to wait for state legislation to make change in their own office. So they have the power to enact a lot of the clean slate policies we're talking about.
Great, and I'll just have one or two more questions before we go to the next part of the day. I wanted to just ask you, Mark, you raised economics, and I think one of the greatest inequities in the system is that we have places all throughout the country where you have sort of cash-strapped counties that essentially have created a whole economic ecosystem out of criminalization, right? So even small fines grow into deep burdens and can be criminalized. And I wonder, some of those places can be really far-flung, get less attention than things happening in a city, et cetera. Given the way you're thinking about economics, what do you think we can do over time to reach those places that have been harder to reach? Some of these are completely local issues that develop. And is it to go to the state level? Is it to really get to counties? What do you think about sort of reversing the economics?
Well, no, I mean, that's part of the problem with the system is we use the criminal justice system for profit, right? Whether it's asset forfeiture, fees and fines, like you mentioned, cash bail, then
connecting fees and fines to criminality. So that
right. Well, and then people who are in reentry trying to get your record clean. I mean, you got to hire a lawyer and all that. So, you know, I don't know how to reach everyone, but I do think that to the extent these issues exist, there needs to be someone calling them on it. And I think that with technology, that makes our world is a lot smaller. But that is a huge issue. I mean, that's part of the problem in our criminal justice system. I mean, what I understood, what happened in Ferguson, you know, it was awful. And it was really, there were, what, 30,000 fees and fines in a town of 10,000 in 1 year. People were fed up, and it puts, so if you look at it, it makes communities less safe. It puts police against the citizens they're supposed to be protecting and working with. So it's a complete mess. That's part of the problem with our criminal justice system in general, is it's become too big, too sprawling, and completely ineffective. And if you look at what's the data, that from 1990 to 2005, we built on average every 10 days a new prison or jail in this country. So we don't have any money left, and now we're using that system to try to generate other revenue. So I think that basically, to the extent these issues exist, they need to be addressed, and a lot of them, in my opinion, like the fees and fines and cash bail system, Bill of Rights, the 8th Amendment deals with all of that stuff, and we need to clean up so many parts of the criminal justice system. I mean, from beginning to end, right? From the laws that are passed to prosecutorial practices, which we haven't even got into, to indigent defense programs, sentencing we've talked about, prison reform we've talked about, and reentry reform. So all of that needs to be fixed. And you know, however we can do it, we need to do it based on comparative advantage and a division of labor. That's why we at Koch, I mentioned earlier, jobs. We've also started a reentry program called Safe Streets and Second Chances. We're doing that with Right on Crime, Texas Public Policy Foundation, Charles Koch Foundation, and Florida State University. We're in 4 states. We're doing a pilot program. People coming out of prison, half will get our program, half are going to get what the states provide. And we're going to see over the next couple of years who get better outcomes. And hopefully that can be a game changer in reentry. So our whole goal is for reentry to begin day 1 of incarceration, not 60 days out. So all these different things, innovations, and I'm not smart enough, I can barely turn off my iPhone, but the technology is very important, but there's also going to be just person-to-person type of interactions as well, trying to help people get better.
And as we close out this session, I just want to ask you both, and start with you, David. How do you see? What's your hope for where we are in 5 years from now?
Well, as it relates to clean slate, my hope would be as many states as humanly possible have both passed the right kind of legislation, and then have the right kind of resources and approach on execution. And where it hasn't passed, it's an active debate. So I really think in all 50 states, and I think that all of us involved in that then need to help those who are trying to get that done at the state level, lift up the great work and stories, and put pressure where it's not happening quickly enough. And then I think, hopefully, that, you know, as Mark just went through the whole list of issues, that across the criminal justice panoply of issues in terms of when you're looking at remedies and the various levers, that the momentum continues at the state level. I mean, I do think, Mark and I were talking earlier, you know, it's really not a debate at the state level anymore that we have to do something. There can be debates about what we need to do and on what time frame, but again, that's a big change. And so I think to make sure that that's nourished and we're broadening out those coalitions, we're using technology, we're doing the right kind of capacity building for the groups getting the job on the ground, but we nourish this. Because I do think, I mean, I don't think we're ever going to go back to the 70s and 80s. I think those days are past. But this is a pretty important window right now to maximize as many law changes as possible, as much coalition building as possible, as much as smart execution. So I think we can all be happy about the progress that's being made, but I don't think we can get complacent. I think this is the time. Windows don't last forever. This is a pretty important and big window right now, I think, at a time where we are divided on a lot of other issues. And I think also this shows, like, I think, you know, to get on my soapbox a little bit, but one of the problems in politics and government today is people do put on jerseys. And if I don't agree with you on everything, I can't work with you on anything. And I think this is a place where, and I'd like to, hopefully this leads to other places, but at least we can show that people can come together and put their shoulder to the wheel and really be smart and be patient. Because I think this clean slate effort, we have momentum now. There's some states that are going to obviously try and get this done next year, but it is going to take 5 years in many cases, and we got to stick with it and not move on to the next shiny object. Because obviously, making sure that people's they basically have that fresh start at life that Roland talked about. We have to have that for everybody in America.
Everything he just said, but I'd also add, I think, just in general. more and more reforms at the federal level. And so, for example, if we are truly interested and passionate about rehabilitating people, like I think we are, and the First Chance Act, the First Step Act makes that clear, we should move, hopefully within the next 5 years or sooner, BOP under Health and Human Services, if we're about rehabilitation. And then if we really are about second chances and want to maximize that, we should take the clemency process totally out of the Department of Justice. And those would be two at the federal level. And in other ways, I mean, we got to keep fixing the criminal justice system, but to David's point, we got to find other ways to work together on things like K through 12 education, right? I mean, it's really, we know that what happens with people who don't go to good schools, they oftentimes end up in prisons. You know, we spend, 3 to 4 times more per capita on incarcerating people in this country than we do on K through 12 education annually. So I think we got to find ways to work on K through 12 together, cut through all that, because all these things need to happen. We need our communities to be vibrant. We need a smaller, much more safe criminal justice system. We need better schools. And I think we've got a great opportunity. These windows don't last forever, but I do know this, that, you know, that politics is downstream from culture, and politicians in general love to get to the front of the parade. So we keep having success like this.
I've never met anyone like that.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, this is now something people can run on, and we need to maximize that as well.
So thank you both for the partnership on this issue, for the
Thank you.
change we've made, and hopefully we'll continue to make with an accelerated push. Thank you both so much. And time for, we're going to have a video and then our next panel.
Hi everyone, my name is Malcolm Jenkins. I'm a safety for the Philadelphia Eagles. Last year, former NFL player Anquan Bolden and I co-founded the Players Coalition, a 501c3 charitable foundation and 501c4 advocacy organization created to impact social and racial inequalities in the areas of criminal justice reform, police community relations, and education and economic advancement. I'm sorry I'm not able to join you guys today, but I wanted to send along this message because of how much I care about these issues. Earlier this year, my fellow Player Coalition members and I were proud to see our great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania become a national leader on second chances and pass the Clean Slate Act. Now Pennsylvania's Clean Slate Act is using technology to automatically clear criminal records after someone remains crime-free for a set period of time. People don't need lawyers, they don't need to pay a fee, they don't need to understand the legal system, and we're proud supporters of this act. And we're excited to see other states following in Pennsylvania's footsteps. States like Michigan, Colorado, South Carolina, and more. And also folks who don't agree on anything else coming together to support them. Just because you made a mistake in the past doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to contribute in the future. Let's pass Clean Slate everywhere.
Hey everybody, my name is Rebecca Vallis. I am the Vice President of the Poverty to Prosperity program here at the Center for American Progress, but I'm also going to put on one of my former hats and wear that today too, which is actually how I come to these issues. I am a former legal aid lawyer, a recovering legal aid lawyer I often say, although not recovering very well because it's still what really drives my work on these issues every single day. And it's a lot of fun and really thrilling and a real honor to be in the room with so many leaders on these issues, those who are coming up on the stage, and also all of you in the audience, seeing a lot of familiar faces out there. So thank you for being with us today. Before I introduce the panel, a couple of housekeeping items, because that gets to be my role too. So I guess I'm wearing 3 hats. Hashtag Clean Slate is what folks should be using if they are tweeting. You want to join the conversation on Twitter. You can also check out the new website that actually has a lot more information about the campaign that Neera just mentioned, and Mark and David mentioned as well, the Clean Slate campaign coming to states across across the country. That website is cleanslatecampaign.org, and you can find a lot more about Clean Slate there. And I'm also going to flag the toolkit, the Clean Slate toolkit that was distributed when you checked in and registered. So grab that if you haven't seen it yet. A lot more information and resources in there as well. But I'll put on the first hat and the main hat I'll be wearing today as the moderator of this next fantastic panel. And I'm going to ask my fellow panelists to come up here as I call them by name. So we've already screwed up, guys. We're off to a great start, panel. In addition to my current boss, Nira, having just been on the stage, we're going to bring up also my former boss. So guys, be nice to me. Make me look good, okay? So Sharon Dietrich, the litigation director at Community Legal Services of Philadelphia. Come on up, Sharon. And our partner in this Clean Slate design. You're getting cheers, Sharon. Look, you're popular. We've got Tamisha Bridges Mansfield, who's a program officer at the Kellogg Foundation, whom we're so grateful to as such an important partner in this work. We've got District Attorney Tori Verber Salazar, who is the District Attorney of San Joaquin County, California. District Attorney Salazar, thank you so much for being with us today. We've got Jared Rodriguez, who is the CEO of the Calder Group. He is also the guru of the Business Coalition, working with Safe and Just Michigan on the Clean Slate campaign. Thanks so much for being with us today, Jared. And then we have a slight change in the agenda, which is that Daryl Atkinson of the formerly incarcerated and convicted Peoples and Families Movement had hoped to be with us today, but his flight got canceled because, as you may have noticed, it's lovely spring weather out there. So he's sad not to be with us today, but we are incredibly lucky to have another all-star working on these issues with us in his stead. And that, Will, I'm hyping you up here. You got to live up to this. And that's Will Heaton. He's the Vice President of Government Affairs at Just Leadership USA. Will, thanks so much. Oh, you guys haven't even sat yet. Take a seat, folks. All right. Great. So to get right into it, because we heard a lot of fantastic discussion already about why folks who agree on pretty much nothing else, including sports, it turns out, I think I didn't know that until today, are coming together around this clean slate concept. But before we get into kind of more of the details about where each of you are coming from, Sharon, I want to start with you because we heard from Ronald before about his own personal story and what clean slate is going to mean to him and to his community, but you're actually Ronald's former lawyer. And so would love to hear you tell a little bit of the story of how Ronald came to you and how that ended up actually becoming the origin of the clean slate idea.
Thanks, Rebecca. So I started at Community Legal Services in Philadelphia 30 years ago as an employment lawyer, and never in my early days would it have occurred to me that I was going to spend my days at events like this, talking about criminal justice, because back in the late 1980s, this was simply not an issue that we saw all that often as part of our employment law practice. But beginning in the 1990s and speeding up with every passing year for at least 2 decades, more and more people came to CLS to say, hey, my real employment problem is that I have a record and I can't get a job and I can't keep a job when I get it, and the background check is always bad. And so Ronald was one of those many people, and many of my clients have stories just like Ronald's. He's a particularly articulate spokesman for it, but there's so many people that have the same story of having some minor transgression when they were young. So we came up with many strategies, and I should say, to quantify how important this issue is to low-income people who have employment needs now, we get about 1,500 new cases a year. Of that 1,500 just employment cases, 1,000 are about criminal records. So it is far and away the single most common reason people come to CLS for employment law help. We came up with all kinds of strategies to try to address that issue. Oh, thank you. But eventually it occurred to us that we needed to do a healthy part of our practice being expungement work or sealing work, because most people, when they came to CLS, said, I want to get my record expunged. They didn't say, I want to sue an employer or I want to sue a background check company. They said, I want to expunge my record, because they knew that what that meant was basically a new lease on life, that they could get any job and they could get any apartment. So we at CLS started to do a serious employment law practice, and we started at about 600 cases a year, 600 criminal cases a year that we would expunge. And we realized that wasn't cutting it because it wasn't even, beginning to meet the need. And so we came up with all kinds of strategies to do that better and faster. One of my colleagues created a piece of software that builds expungement petitions. You'll hear more about that tomorrow if you're coming to tomorrow's event. We did expungement clinics, and we pushed and pushed and pushed and did 5 times as many cases in 5 years. So that was about 3,000. And guess what? We still weren't even close to meeting the need for that our community alone in Philadelphia was presenting, much less across the state. So that's what brought me to the issues that eventually led to Clean Slate.
And Sharon, just to stay with you for a moment to sort of tell this story a little bit further, so that was the problem that you at Community Legal Services and your colleagues there were seeing, but a big part of this actually had to do with the fact that it was a petition-based system. This is why people were coming through your doors needing a lawyer's help. We heard a little bit about that from Mark and David before as well. So help us understand, how did that then become the birth of the idea for Clean Slate?
Well, for one thing, we practically crashed the First Judicial District's docket by how many petitions we filed. And as I said, we were only filing 3,000 a year, but that was enough to make all the petitions line up, and you needed months in order to get your petition heard. And what was insane about it was that all the cases were really the same. They just involved creating the same form petition where you had to insert a whole bunch of information, and then it got filed, and then a DA looked at it and either objected or didn't, and then you'd appear in front of a judge, and then the judge would push the paper onto the clerks, and the clerks would push the paper onto somebody else. So it was just a very labor-intensive system, and even though we were not charging our clients, unlike many clients elsewhere, it was just something that was never going to work on a sustained basis in a large way.
This was something I remember seeing when you were my boss, and I was working on these cases too. And so, true story, the idea for Clean Slate was sort of born out of a glass of wine of me and Sharon banging our heads against the wall going, man, there's got to be a better way to do this and bring help to more people. And so Clean Slate was born. And so the short version then, how did this become law? And then I'm going to bring in other folks.
So we had enough experience working with databases, public databases in Pennsylvania, that we understood that you could put in a computer query and basically say, these are the criteria to seal or expunge a case, and that computer could exercise that and do it in a broad way. So we intellectually understood this was entirely possible from what we knew of our work with the state police in Pennsylvania, with the Administrative Office of Pennsylvania Courts. So we were fortunate that the Justice Action Network, which at that point I think was a fairly new bipartisan criminal justice reform coalition, decided to make Clean Slate a priority. And we came up with a bill, but more important, we came up with prime sponsors. And for the first time, we had Senator Scott Wagner, which may be a common name, a name you've heard in this room, even if you're not from Pennsylvania. Senator Wagner just ran against Governor Wolf for governor of Pennsylvania. Was kind of an up-and-coming, very conservative Republican star, was an employer, and he agreed to be one of the prime sponsors of the bill. Along with a more traditional business-oriented Republican and the other house, and along with 2 Philadelphia Democrats. And from that initial part where we got those 4 very different sponsors together on the bill, this thing just moved really quite nicely. And I should say, Pennsylvania is not a state that is eager to make big, bold expungement changes. Our expungement rules are not so hot in Pennsylvania compared to what a lot of other states do. But everybody could see the good sense of, if people have rights, let's figure out how to get them enforced. And so we rolled along pretty nicely with all kinds of unusual partners that I wouldn't even say we faced a lot of opposition. What we mostly faced was some skepticism about whether the technology would work. Working with AOPC, the courts, and the state police, we determined that it would. We, at one point, got kind of stopped up in the system, and Malcolm Jenkins, who you saw in the video, came out to Harrisburg to help us. Eventually, the Pennsylvania prosecutors also said that they felt comfortable with the bill. I saw Greg Rowe here somewhere. So ultimately, we had a big old event at the end of the session, which featured pretty much anyone who was anyone saying that this bill should be passed. And it was one of the more extraordinary bipartisan efforts you'll ever see.
And a Republican-controlled legislature teaming up with a Democratic governor,
Correct.
including during a race where they were on opposite sides competing for the governorship. So really a one for the memoirs in a lot of ways. So Will, I want to bring you in next. So one of the we've been talking mostly today about the United States criminal justice system, but I often find, and I think a lot of folks increasingly are finding, that looking overseas and seeing how other countries do this is actually really helpful and instructive, because the way we do it in the U.S. ain't the only way, spoiler alert. And actually along these lines, there was a major delegation that recently went to Europe, to Germany and Norway. A shout out to the Vera Institute of Justice, which led that. And one of the things that, for example, came out of that visit was that when you look at European countries like Germany and Norway, there isn't even the concept of the loss of rights. And so they don't even have these conversations about the restoration of rights, right? So this is really uniquely a United States problem. From the perspective of someone, and JLUSA is a group that is all about people with records being the leaders and the change makers on these issues, from that perspective, how does Clean Slate fit in with the kinds of thinking we need to be doing on criminal justice reform?
Sure. Thanks, Rebecca, for giving the opportunity to be here, and I'll do my best to, sort of channel Daryl's thoughts through a lot of this conversation. But I think going to your point about this recent trip over to, some European countries, our CEO, Deanna Hoskins, joined Daryl Atkinson on this trip with a number of other leaders. And when we were talking about this after she had come home, I think the biggest thing that really rang out was the fact that nobody loses their human dignity. And what we do with our criminal justice system in this country is rob people of their human dignity in the way that we treat them throughout every step of this system. And I think even, for myself, I caught a federal felony conviction about 12 years ago now. And what was really many things that was striking to me about it was when I went into the courtroom for my sentencing hearing, it was my crime caught national attention. It was on the front page of the Washington Post multiple times. But it was like this entirely huge packed courtroom facade, of just like parade, like with all of this attention around what this sentence for me was going to be. And then I remember, when I finally finished up, my probation several years later, like I just walked out of the probation office one day and that was the end of it. And it's like nobody ever knew anything. And I was they kind of like signed a piece of paper and it was done. And, for me, like what I had to endure during that time just pales in comparison to what so many other individuals in this country endure. And I think what Mark Holden had said earlier, I wanted to mention this again, these famous words of Bryan Stevenson about how you're better off being rich and guilty than innocent and poor in this country happens every single day to thousands and thousands of people. And even when you finish your sentence, that criminal record continues to haunt millions of Americans. Ronald and I were talking before this panel started, and he was like, this Clean Slate initiative is fantastic, but what we really need to be focusing on now is getting people into jobs. And my colleague Lester Young, who does a lot of our organizing for Just Leadership in South Carolina, when he's working with people in these communities across that state, that's the first thing that he's hearing about. It's not just the criminal record. It's that I'm being completely locked out of any ability to lead a fulfilling life. And in doing that, I'm like losing my own human dignity. And so I think to come back to just the importance of Clean Slate, what this is that it's an important step in that I think automating this process takes the economic barrier out of this, and the fact that just even the time somebody might have to take to go to their lawyer's office that brings them away from their job that could threaten their employment. But I think it's just the beginning of what we need to be doing and thinking about how much bolder we need to do. And, even like in my circumstance with the felony conviction, like clean slate passes, even if it's only covering a misdemeanor charge, like I'm not going to be eligible for that. And I'm not in any, circumstance, where I necessarily need to have that felony expunged. But for a lot of other Americans, they don't have that that privilege and right. And so I think it's a good reminder to us of just a lot of the like monumental structural barriers that afflict a lot of people in this country, and that this is the first of many steps that we need to be taking to address those.
And Tamisha, I want to bring you in next from your perspective at the Kellogg Foundation. Your portfolio there is about employment, and obviously the Kellogg Foundation cares a great deal about kids and families, and that was really our beginning of conversations about these issues, was about the impacts on kids and on families. Neera mentioned in her opening, and there was a little bit of discussion in the earlier panel about just that striking number. I got to tell you, when Cap was doing that analysis, we almost fell out of our chairs. Never in our wildest dreams did we expect the number was going to be as high as nearly half of kids in this country having at least one parent with a record. And that was a conservative estimate, which breaks my heart every single time I say that out loud. Shed a little bit of light for us on what this means to children and to families, and how Kellogg got involved.
Yeah, so thank you for that. So at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, children are really at the heart of everything we do, right? And so what we know is that kids live in families. Families are a part of communities. And in order for parents to fully show up for their children, they have to have access to a quality job. And in order for their communities to be safe, they have to have people in those communities who are able to fully re-engage and commit back into those communities. So kids, parents, and families are really at the center of all that we do. And so when we really think about this issue, it was that issue around half of children having a parent or a caretaker or someone who is in justice involved. And I use that language, justice involved, very specifically because it's not just about incarceration, right? It's about someone who's been arrested. It's about someone who has another type of a conviction that blocks them out. And so what we know, like you said, is that when folks have a conviction or have some type of a contact with the justice system, it locks them out of employment. And that locking out happens at the point of application. If you know you have to apply for a job and you know that question is going to be on there, folks aren't going to go and apply for that job. If you know that going to find an apartment, right, and a place for you and your family to live is going to cause that issue to come back up, that may block you as well. And so all that creates enormous amount of instability in the lives of children, right? It means that children are homeless. It means that they have a parent who can't fully show up and be present in their lives. And it creates all kinds of levels of secondary and primary trauma in those children's lives. If you look at issues around adverse childhood experiences and the ACEs scores and folks who know things about trauma-informed care, and you look at the indicators of trauma in children's lives, having a parent who is incarcerated is one of those markers, right? And so when kids, the things that happen in kids' lives as their children impacts their trajectory going forward. And when children have high incidence of trauma in their lives as kids, that then impacts their risk for chronic illness, their risk for workforce instability going forward, and their risk of getting caught up in the system. So for us, it really all goes back to children and how having that parent really impacts, having that parent who's justice involved impacts their lives and their ability to have a parent who's fully present, fully engaged, and fully able to provide in their lives.
Attorney Salazar, so we heard a little bit earlier about that sort of refrain everyone knows so well, tough on crime. And there's almost no one who more comes to mind than the face of a prosecutor, right? When you think about who those advocates for tough on crime policies used to be pretty much across the board. Now, you're here, sitting here, not as the person we have to persuade that this makes sense, but actually as a champion for reform and for automating record clearing, like through policies such as Clean Slate. How did you, as a district attorney, come to these issues and shed a little bit of light for us on your perspective inside the system that gets so burdened by this one-off petition process that Sharon was describing earlier?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. And I ran for office in 2014, and I ran on Tough on Crime. There's no doubt. I was endorsed by law enforcement. I come from the San Joaquin County. The seat of the county is Stockton, had one of the highest crime rates in the largest city at the time before Detroit to go bankrupt. So everything that could be going wrong was going wrong. We were economically struggling, crime was rising, gang violence was high, narcotics were coming up and down the corridors. It was a very difficult, very tough time. And so when I came into office, I had that chance to sit there and look and say, well we know what's not working because I'm getting that result every day. How can we see what it looks like to work? And part of being out there and campaigning and knocking on people's doors is when you knock on people's doors, you realize how many people are living with a criminal history. So it's in my community, it's a significant number. 40% of my community is foreign born, 25% of my community lives below the poverty line, 15% above that is precariously close to it. A lot of that is driven, and it is driven by the criminal justice system and what we have done and the policies and the implementation that we have done and the racially discriminatory impact that it has on my community, not only from the destruction of families to neighborhoods, to communities, to the economics of it, to the morale, and just the whole spirituality of our community was being defined by this and not being allowed to succeed. It was as if you put the hand on somebody's head and continue to push them further down into poverty. And that was never what I got into this job to do, nor the people I work with. So that's when we started to take a really hard look at what are we doing and why are we doing this and why is this, what can we do to change? And so we broke it down into 3 simple categories. What can we do before to keep people from coming into the system? If they're currently in the system, what can we do to get them out? And if they're out of the system, how can we clean it up and allow them that opportunity? And that was basically the 3 areas we just tackled, because otherwise it was too overwhelming, because there were so many areas where we had failed and we had let our current community down and hadn't been successful in what was the intent to accomplish. So we looked at programs and developed programs that allow us to defer people out so they don't even come. So over 75% of our youth offenders do not even come into the system. They go into other wraparound services and alternative programming. And now we're moving that into our adult population as well. And we're looking at in programs that we run within our office that allow individuals to have the opportunity to not come into the system, but to do some work to make themselves in a better position. And then if they're currently in the system, California has a number of propositions that have come through since 2015, Proposition 47, 64, 57, we like our propositions, and in California. But what we're doing is we're saying we're going to erase it. We're going to clean up the mistake, we're going to acknowledge it, we're going to apologize, and I have apologized, and we're going to make it better. So what we've done is any of those crimes that are listed in those propositions, we now go back and dismiss and seal. And what's so important too is some cases you can only dismiss because there are a few technical things in the law that we're working to change right now, but dismiss and seal. Seal is important because you really have to seal that record. And so that's going to allow us to tackle all kinds of cases. As a matter of fact, we just had Department of Justice run our to give you an idea, 250,000 hits came through on marijuana cases for my county that I'm going to go back and clean up, and we're going to dismiss and seal. We've done 25,000 already on Prop 47. But what we realized is that the technology was killing us because my county isn't an affluent, we're not a county of billionaires. We're a county of hardworking people. We're an ag community, and we needed help. So organizations like Code for America, Fair and Just Prosecution, Institute for Innovation, Clean Slate, all of these wonderful partners have come to us. And what's amazing about this is you give us the tools and the power to be successful. And so what that has done is Code for America runs the RAP through an algorithm and then prints it out into a petition, puts it into a petition and then forwards it to the court. San Francisco, who's our partner in this program, their court is even allowing just to do a spreadsheet. That's how fast it'll be. Because if we do petitions, the court's only going to be able to absorb about 35, 50, like you were saying, 3,000, and we could do 1,000 a day on a spreadsheet. so that's going to be, that 250,000 all of a sudden seems like it's doable in 2019 versus looking out for, at 3,000 for 3 years, you're looking at 20-year project. And that's not fair to people, and that's not right. This should be quick, justice should be swift, and it should be quick. So Those kind of partnerships and that kind of technology has allowed us to take it so much further. And what it's done for us, what I'm truly grateful for, is it's brought all these wonderful minds together, all of this energy together, and then we started to say, why are we doing any of these cases? Because really, when you look at a criminal's case, and like you were talking about yours, it really is kind of a contract, if you will, in the simplest of terms. I literally make an offer, your attorney accepts or you accept, and then there's consideration given. There's time given, there's probation given, parole, whatever the case may be. But once it's completed, the contract is now null and void. Why does it keep going? Why does it keep going? But instead, I say, yeah, you've done everything right. You've obeyed all the laws. You've completed probation and parole. But you know what? I'm going to punish you for the rest of your life. And you're going to be a felon for the rest of your life. I am going to keep you there forever. That was never the deal. And that's what rehabilitation, in California, we literally have the word rehabilitation. It's California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation in it. So we feel that now we're looking at every case and saying, okay, how can we move this off people's history? And the only exceptions would be, priorable offenses for super strikes. We have those in California, and 290 registrable offense. There are some exceptions. I'm not saying every case, but I would say about 90% of those cases could be looked at, whether they're misdemeanors and felonies, and removed off. And the ones that we need, such as driving under the influence or things like of that nature, would remain on. But the other ones really are there to keep you from being successful. And what we've seen is by allowing people the opportunity, and we're doing it without them even knowing it. We're doing it ex parte, if you will, because we don't have the means to get in contact. Some of these cases are older, and they didn't before cell phones and emails, and they've moved on. But we're doing it on to everybody, every name that we have, because we want to make sure that people have the opportunity to be successful. And what JPAL is doing, which is a great partnership, because what we foresee is when you've been told your whole life that you cannot have traditional employment. And I mean traditional, that means you're getting taxed and W-2s and all the great stuff that we get to do. If you're not getting that done, then you're getting paid under the table, which we see a lot of abuse, where you're getting not paid sufficiently. There's no health care, retirement, or plans like this. So we want to see people get more traditional employment. But what we believe is because you've been told your whole life that you cannot achieve success because of that felony or even that misdemeanor conviction, that you don't have the tools and resources to be successful in employment. So JPAL and I were going through 10,000 of our files, randomizing them, and then looking and seeing which ones of those, comparing them with records, are filing or have gone into traditional employment. We believe the number is going to be low. And from that, we're asking our legislation to enact and give our community-based organizations more resources to help. Because once you do get your record clean, now you've got to get in employment, and you have to have those employable skills, and you have to have that ability to know that you are employable, because we have told you your whole life, from your youth to your adult, that you are not employable. Now we need to change that. So we're not only thinking about what we're doing today, but what we're going to do tomorrow when we see these results and have better opportunities for individuals to do well out there.
Well, Daryl Atkinson has managed to join us. Daryl, I hate to tell you, you're a little late. I don't know that we at CAP are the ones who have those connections these days, I hate to tell you. So Daryl Atkinson will recognize you, and maybe, is there a way to bring you to this? Yeah, we'll do a little half-seas. You want to come up and join us for the second part? Fantastic, great. All right, so round of applause for Daryl Atkinson. Nevertheless, he persisted. So Daryl, do you want to talk a little bit, now that you're here, about the formerly incarcerated and convicted peoples and families movement, and how you guys are coming to these issues?
The way that I like to think about FICPFM, and it is a handful of alphabet soup, but we've learned to say other alphabet soup, so I'm sure we can learn to say this one. The way that I like to think about it is that we're building the AARP for formerly incarcerated people. And so what does that mean? When you think about the AARP and it being a locus of power, when you think about the issues that older Americans face, before any changes are made to prescription drugs or Medicare or what have you, believe me, they talk to that interest group before they make any of those changes. So we're attempting to build the same power base for formerly incarcerated people, coming off 2 huge wins in both Florida and Louisiana, Florida, the restoration of voting rights for 1.4 million folks. We partnered with Desmond Meade and the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition to convene over 1,000 formerly incarcerated people this past September in Orlando. We did canvassing, we got Get Out to Vote, we touched 82,000 voters in 2 hours, and we're attempting to build that kind of power all across the country. And issues, because when you change power dynamics, what's possible from a policy perspective expands, and that includes issues like clean slate and criminal record mitigation. So that's what we're attempting to build, and that's what we hope to bring to this partnership.
Thank you so much for your partnership and for your clear dedication to making it here today. We really appreciate it. So Jared, I want to bring you into the conversation here. So we heard a little bit earlier about how this is not just a set of issues that have an impact on individuals. It's not just a set of issues that have an impact on families. They impact whole communities. They impact even the entire national economy. Another number that always knocks me out of my chair when I hear it, it comes to us from our friends at the Center for Economic Policy Research, is that shutting people with records out of the labor market is costing the national economy as much as $87 billion per year just in lost gross domestic product. So obviously a huge economic piece of this that has all kinds of macro implications. You're here today, and what you spend your time in Michigan doing is sort of working with the business community on these issues. How does the business community and employers come to this set of issues, and why are you here also as a champion of the idea called Clean Slate?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I love going last. But I contend that our greatest natural resource in our country is our people. Our greatest export is our knowledge. And we are clearly missing an awful lot of our talent pool and our knowledge. So something's got to change. The business community, with the unemployment rate in our country and in Michigan as low as it's been in decades, we have a limited talent pool. We know that if people have records, it certainly does restrict economic activity and productivity. We have workforce shortages, clear talent gaps that are going unfilled. Community safety, #1 issue in Michigan for the reason why the business community wants to get involved in any kind of corrections or prison reform, as well as clean slate. The business community has also said that if we invest in people, it will yield great returns. So the business community has kind of stepped up, taken over a little bit of the dialogue from traditional advocates in this space. But they have really stepped up because of community safety, talent, and savings. If it's on the list, it's quite a bit far down the list, if not last. And the reason being is because they see any savings that come out of this, prison closures, what have you, as opportunities to reinvest. And by reinvest, they want to reinvest in training. They want a talented workforce for returning citizens when they come out so that they can hire and put to work. Statistics show, and the data shows, that if we do have jobs out there for returning citizens, they are less likely to reoffend and recommit any kind of crime. And obviously, if they are out there, as the data shows, I think it's 4 to 7 years without any other reoccurring offense, they are no more likely to reoffend or commit another crime than anyone else in our society or neighborhoods. So the data has been a real driver in this effort. The business community has taken some bold steps in Michigan to say we will hire returning citizens. In fact, we will invest our own resources and do some trainings while people are 24 months from departure or returning into our neighborhoods. Let's get them training, let's get a skill ready, and if we can, we'll interview before folks get out so that we can offer jobs. So it's just a little bit of a twist on the thinking, but it is going to yield some very good results as far as that #1 concern of community safety. So those are the main reasons why the business community has really stepped up and said we need to do something different, because what we've always been doing is not working.
Michigan is, of course, one of the states for folks to be watching as we gear up for state legislative sessions next year because of some fantastic work that you and partners at Safe and Just Michigan and other organizations are doing to bring Clean Slate there. So heads up, audience, we're about to go to you. This is your moment, so get ready. Be thinking of your questions. Make them hard. This is clearly a very smart panel. But in the meantime, I'm going to kick that off by going back to you one more time, Sharon, just to give us a preview now that Clean Slate has been signed into law in Pennsylvania, and you're now in the implementation phase of that as we speak. You're sort of taking a break from that to come and hang out with us here today to talk about it. What do we know about how many people are going to be helped by the Pennsylvania version of this law?
So during the legislative campaign, we kind of took it on faith that this was going to do something big. And quite honestly, I didn't want to know how big it was going to be because I thought it might be scary to some people. And now that we're post passage of the bill, those numbers are looking as big as I thought and maybe even bigger. So one number I've been told, one of the things that we're doing in Pennsylvania is sealing non-convictions. Charges were brought against you and dropped, or you're found not guilty. Those can go in background check reports and often do. I've represented hundreds of people who lost jobs because of arrests that they were not convicted of. The number we've been told is that hundreds of millions of charges are going to be automatically sealed. Hundreds of millions. So that's just for the non-convictions. DA Krasner's office has been doing some analysis of some data to try to extrapolate how many misdemeanor convictions may be sealed. And the early returns there are also extremely promising. Of the 5-year period that was analyzed, the number of people to be helped with just convictions was 147,000. These are all people who don't have to file petitions now that will just automatically get their records sealed. And that number could be higher if we are able to deal with certain implementation barriers that I am working on. And that number of convictions accounts for 22% of all convictions. So the numbers really are turning out to be as extraordinary, if not more so, than we hoped when we went into this.
Rebecca, if I might just jump on this, one of the things that we're looking to implement in 2019, and I'm very grateful who traveled with me here today is the public defender for my county, because you have to work with your public defender. You have to have a partnership in making this work, as well as the courts, to really make this successful. But so, yes, thank you for my public defenders here. Miriam Lyle, she's awesome. She's the best public defender San Joaquin County's ever had, let me tell you. And so we work on this collaboratively, but one of the things that she and I are trying to roll out this year is that when you are convicted of whether it be a misdemeanor or a felony, you get a 3-year, usually informal probation for a misdemeanor, or 5-year for a felony in California. At the end of that date, if there's nothing new, then we seal it right then. Seal it right then, and then we're done. And we don't have to go back and do hundreds of millions of cases and clear it up. And so that's what we're looking to implement in San Joaquin County next year, is a policy that we're rolling it out first in misdemeanors and then in our felonies, that it's done then on that date. And you don't have to come back to court unless there's something you want to discuss. So I'm hoping that will catch on and move throughout the states too, because that's really going to save people having to come back into the system, get back with their attorney, and miss time from work and things like that nature.
So members of the audience, I see my first question right here, and it goes to Josh Ho right here in the front, but wait for your mic so everyone can hear you.
I'm Josh Ho with Nation Outside of Michigan. She asked for tough questions. I'll ask basically a version of the same one I asked last year. We know that over 50% of all people in state prisons have a violent offense. We know, at least in Michigan and a lot of other places in the country, over 1 in 4 people going into prisons have a sexual conviction. But all of these people are almost always universally not allowed in on these deals. And so, as a representative of those categories, I'd like to ask what you all think about how we can make sure that we make these arguments for all people who are formerly incarcerated, not just some.
Such a fantastic question, and one that deserves applause. Yeah. Thank you, Josh. And I also just want to plug Josh's amazing work in Michigan, also as a really important partner on the Clean Slate campaign there. So panel, he promised you a hard question, and he gave you one, but I think it is really the million-dollar question here. How can we have a conversation about moving the needle where change is possible today while not losing sight of the bigger picture that change fits into, that is what we should all be working towards? And I don't know who wants to be the first to kick us off on this. I'm going to predict it might be Daryl. If
Sure, and you go straight to the heart of the matter. I come at this not only as a formerly incarcerated person, but also as a lawyer and someone who's done criminal record mitigation work for over a decade. And you're right in that under our current laws in North Carolina, the average, about 4 out of 10 folks who would come to our legal clinics would be eligible for some type of relief because of the narrowness of the law. And that's why I'm going to go back to what I said previously, that power in building power amongst grassroots folks has to be part of the equation. Otherwise, you're constantly going to be confined by the sensibilities, the political sensibilities of people who are decision makers. Unless you can change and enlarge that frame, we're going to be stuck as far as what is able to be achieved. The second thing that I would say in our rhetorical campaigns and also the legislative advocacy, the carve-outs that are going to happen, we have to do that in a way that does not demonize those folks to the point where we can't come back and do that work in the future. So this whole dichotomy of violent versus nonviolent, sex offender versus person who isn't required to register, if we so easily give those interest groups up in the carceral state and demonize them as the boogie person, right, it's going to make it that much harder to ultimately do clean slate legislation for those type of offense types. So that would be a couple of my reactions to your question.
District Attorney Salazar, it looks like you want to get in as well.
I think that's an important conversation because in California, we just are starting in 2020, we'll be redoing our lifetime registration for 290 offenders, which was a big step for California. So it'll be incremental, whether it be 7-year, 10-year, or lifetime registration. So we're seeing some movement in this area. Maybe not as fast as people would like. I think where we're missing the opportunity is that if an individual comes into the system and is put into the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, we're not focusing on that specific issue. We're not addressing the underlying reason for that offense. In most, if not all cases, they were an individual that were a victim of child abuse and sexual assault, extreme domestic violence, probably, and maybe even poverty and other forms of abuse. It's learned behavior. And then they become the person who inflicts the harm. And so how do you balance that with the people in the community who want to feel safe and who have suffered the trauma? So it's not an easy question by any means. So you started off strong. I like that. But I think what we need to do is focus in on that we're not providing the rehabilitation part for this issue. When you look at individuals that are committing sexually predatory type of criminal behavior, they're there. So why are we not making them better? And why aren't we working to make sure that they understand the impact of what they've done to their community or to their victims, and often it's family that they've harmed, and given them the tools and the ability to go out and be successful? Because that's really what everybody wants, is that when you're in there, if we're going to put people into a situation, they're there because they've caused some harm to the community. But when they come back, often the system has made them more violent and more harmful. That's like the worst return on, and we're paying $65,000 to $95,000 a year to house them. I think that where we're missing a big part of this conversation is in the prisons and mandating that they do this kind of in-depth psychological work, counseling, and capability to make people understand and give them the tools, to understand what they've done and to be able to come out in society and thrive. And I think we're missing that. And I think what we're missing even more importantly is that we have children living in homes where they are being harmed and we're not hearing them. And we're not getting in there and stabilizing the homes. And we're not helping those children, and we need to be doing more in this area. If there was any place where we could put a lot more resources, it is in the home and teaching people how to not harm one another. And without that, and without on the backside, we're really missing that opportunity. So I think that there would be significant changes, whether it be the super strike, the 290 registrable type offenses, if people believed in the criminal justice system and believed that they could help and rehabilitate people. But right now, when people say that, it's because they haven't seen it. But what's interesting is the data is going to change, because if you, in California, if you look at a male lifer, somebody that's been sentenced to a life tail because they've committed either first or second degree murder, the recidivism rate is 7%. If you're a female lifer, it's 1%. Our general population is about 55 to 70%. So the population that's being more successful in rehabilitation and success outside is our lifer population. And there's a lot of arguments you can have in there. They're older, more time, and all of those kind of conversations you can have. But there's some argument to being made, too, that they've done the work. And that's where I think we really have to focus on our issues, is how do we get individuals to do the work while we have them in the system, incarcerated, and bringing in those sources, because we do still have to answer to everybody about public safety. And we still have to have that balance. And we have to be conscious of our victims, because we're spending a lot of time and resources right now talking about getting people out, because we believe that'll stabilize the family and decrease the amount of victims we have. In my county alone, with Stockton being the seat of my county, we're the most fiscally solvent city in the state of California right now, considering we were bankrupt less than 10 years ago. Our homicide was 46 last year. At this time, it's 30. By being smart on crime and not being quote-unquote tough, we're lowering our crime rate. Our economy is booming. Our rent has tripled. We have more people employed than we have in the past. So there are ways for this to be successful, but to me, the component is getting that help to those individuals who need it, because something's clearly wrong when you're committing these crimes of this magnitude. And so we've got to get those resources in there before people will feel confident in making those changes.
So that emphasis on rehabilitation being so important, and that's a theme that we, I think, have heard throughout today about that, as opposed to this solely punitive model, which has really been put in the rearview mirror by so many people now on both sides of the aisle. So I think we're coming to a close, and I think we probably have time for, I'm looking over here, one more question. I see a hand in the back that just went up there. I think there was a hand in the back that had been up longer, just to show my bias for someone who was waiting.
Hi, Roberta Myers.
Well, hi, Tony.
Hey. Nickname Tony, from Legal Action Center National Hire Network, and a proud member of the FICPFM. Woo! Family. So, two things. One, rehabilitation. People choose when, rehabilitation, and our job is to create opportunity. So I just want to make sure that we think about that and talk about that. Our role is about creating opportunities for people when they're ready, and will make those changes and are ready to move forward. One question I have about Clean Slate and how it's playing out in other states: how much advocacy has to be involved with creating a unified court system? And is that a primary function that typically happens where there's real opportunity for the technological issues that may come up? Because I'm concerned about a number of communities across the states where you have townships and villages that still are not connected very well to reporting to the state repository. And so there's not this, real good central hub of information to really enforce what could be done legislatively. So I'm curious about your thoughts, Sharon, on that and what's going on in Pennsylvania.
So a great question to Sharon, and that's who I was going to give it to, just in case you didn't say that. You already knew that, though. Folks may be familiar with kind of the component that Tony's bringing in here, but this is the technology side of this, right? How do we get to this place of being able to run a computer query to automatically clear a whole bunch of records? You got to have that centralized record system to do it. So Sharon, I think the question to you then on the table is Clean Slate an opportunity to also bring criminal records systems in states that don't have those centralized systems already in place into the 21st century, or maybe even the 20th century?
Absolutely, the technological environment is critical to identifying good places to try to pursue this type of policy. A lot of states have good unified systems, others do not. But what's interesting is there may be ways to do this in states where there aren't statewide systems. For instance, one of the things that's interesting about California, which is not a unified system, is my understanding, is that the counties are huge, right? So if you sealed all of the eligible records in LA County, you'd be doing as much as you might do in some entire states. Other interesting things to think about in terms of technological environment is that many states are looking to move, as Tony suggests, into the 20th or 20th century, if not the 21st. And as your state is looking to do a better job with its computerization, maybe centralizing it, it's an opportunity to think about how this policy might ultimately be applied in that state. And that might be one of the issues that goes into how that system is designed. So if you live in a place where the data doesn't appear right now to do this, do not give up. It's possible that in 5 years you'll live in a state where you can.
Oh, go ahead, Tamisha.
I just want to say, I mean, I think that that whole issue around the systems that have to be fixed in this is really what is about the power of this, right? I mean, when you think about it, there are states and you have to go through like 6 different steps, right, to get a record cleared. And folks who are most vulnerable and who are most impacted by this issue can't jump through those hoops. And so the equalizing factor of this and the way that this clean slate work has an opportunity to reduce racial disparities on who even has access to expungement in the first place is not something that can be ignored. And I think that's one of the reasons that brought the Kellogg Foundation to this, is because it is truly a systems level solution to a problem that impacts individuals, and that cannot be lost, particularly from the stories of the folks who are directly impacted, who came and boldly shared their experiences. We have to keep those people central in the minds and the hearts and how this policy is shaped. And so that systems piece of it is huge, and I really want to applaud the work in Pennsylvania, the work of the campaign, the work that's happening in other states to move this and keep the momentum of this going forward.
Thank you for that. So as we close out, I'm going to use moderator's privilege to put each of you guys on the spot for a 30-second each lightning round as a way to wrap up this afternoon's conversation. And Daryl, fair warning, I'm going to probably start with you and come back around this way. In the next round of state legislative sessions, where a number of states are taking up clean slate bills, Michigan is one of them, South Carolina, Colorado were both mentioned by Malcolm Jenkins in his video earlier. There are others as well that are represented in this room, Utah, Vermont, the list goes on of states that are now looking at this. What is it that we should be watching for? What are you excited for? What is the agenda that we're looking ahead to in 2019 and beyond? Daryl, over to you first.
So I recently had a gift. The Vera Institute for Justice took a delegation of folks to Germany and Norway to speak with their criminal justice officials and view prisons. And in Germany, if you are convicted of a crime, you go into the registry and it automatically falls out off 5 or 10 years, depending on the nature of the offense type. But what was even more remarkable than the automatic clearing is that what they were doing that clearing in service of, where we clean up records to attempt to restore or put people back on a level footing of being an American citizen. They didn't have to do that because they never took rights away. You can vote in prison, you have all of your employment and occupational rights availed to you. Even if you were convicted of a crime, you can go to school in prison. And so what that experience did for me, it really just shifted what my demand should be. I've been demanding the wrong thing. I've been demanding the restoration of rights. my demand should be that you never take away my rights, right? And then we don't have to ban so many boxes and expunge so many records if you never take the rights to begin with. Now, that's not a light switch moment. It's going to take some time to get there, and we got to try to reduce the harm on people, individuals, and communities in the interim. But it's just really shifted what we should be demanding and what we should be asking for. I don't want my rights restored. My rights should never be taken because I didn't stop being a citizen in this country. And so whatever role that this can play in helping usher in, for me, that change, that's what I'm about and that's what I'm fighting for.
Thank you for that. And Jared, over to you next.
You can vote in Michigan, by the way, just so you know. But
not if he's not registered in Michigan. Let's not start
not Daryl.
start that down the road.
Maybe not.
This is how rumors get started, Jared.
Understand. Point taken. You know, I would say that through the work of Safe and Just Michigan, with the coalition that's been put together, we have the traditional advocates of corrections or prison reform. We have the business community that stepped up that we need to continue to hold to the fire even when unemployment rate goes up, because it will go up at some point. We need to look a little bit deeper into that, I will say. But we have the faith community, and we just have community advocates, prosecutors, judges, others that we're speaking with. I can see Michigan joining the Clean Slate movement. We had a turnover in executive office. We don't have to worry about that. We do have a Republican-led legislature. The messengers are going to be key as we move forward. There are barriers to employment, other items that are coming down. Medically fragile, still out there. Bail reform. We've got a number of things that we can see coming out of Michigan in the very near future. We've handled some tough issues already. We've handled some of the sentencing guidelines for lower level offenses. Just last year, we had a victory with objective parole or presumptive parole. You know that, Josh, but you know, the employer community isn't necessarily segmenting out one crime over another. We've got employers that are hiring the worst of the worst crimes out there. We need to encourage more to do that. So in Michigan, I see in the future us and the business community putting their money where their mouth is and looking at training, jobs, community safety moving forward.
District Attorney Salazar.
I think it's important that everybody work with their district attorney and their public defender and their courts, because you have to become engaged and involved with them. And we constantly are meeting with the community. Every day I meet with somebody or somehow involved with the community to hear their thoughts, their concerns, and their ideas. Because if you don't speak with them and share what your ideas are, there's a further divide. And one of the things that we're working on and implementing, and to those who are very want that very tough on crime approach that was around in the 90s, is you sit down and you have a conversation with them. You talk about the data. You talk about the cost. It's $500 to $2,500 for me just to get you to the court that first day on a misdemeanor petty theft. It could be a $1 Snicker bar, and it's going to cost you as a taxpayer $2,500 to get them into the courtroom for that. And then what are the consequences for that misdemeanor? Because now you have a theft-related offense, which by law is a crime of moral turpitude, which eliminates you from a number of jobs, almost all. So, you know, when you start to have those honest conversations with the community and you have them with the people that are involved in the criminal justice system, people start to see that this system is not working. It has failed. It has truly failed, and we have to do more to make it better, and we have to remedy the wrongs that we committed in the past. We have to change the racially discriminatory practices we have. We have to open up the doors to trust and transparency. We have to share our responsibility in those. We have to share our data. We have to share our decision-making process, how we rule on these cases, why we rule on these cases, and then we have to ask ourselves, what is the result, and how is it impacting our community? And we need to have that dialogue, and you need to be that voice, because if you don't have a district attorney or public defender that are willing to have that conversation, then you have the power of the vote, and that's how you get them out. But the more you have that conversation, the more they're going to hear it. The more they hear it, the more they're going to commit to creating change, whether it be through diversion programs so you don't come into the system, remedying situations that are currently in the system, and those post-conviction remedies. All of those need to be addressed. And I can't tell you how important it is. Your voice is very, very powerful. Your voice is so powerful. And then the support we get from like Chan Zuckerberg and from Clean Slate and from Code for America and JPAL and Fair and Just and Institute for Innovation. If they hadn't given me the tools, I would have felt like I was standing there by myself on an island. And so that helps. And as an elected, when you hear from your community that this is the change you want, that is the catalyst, because we work for you. We work for you. You're our boss. So once they hear your voice, they're going to take action. So please speak up, be heard, and help us navigate this change across the United States of America, because there should not be pockets where this is not occurring and these conversations are not occurring.
Kamisha, over to you.
I would say I would speak, I guess the community that I'm a part of in this seat is philanthropy, right? And so I would say really to kind of get in where you fit in. That's like a weird thing to say, but that's actually what I mean. Like, the Kellogg Foundation got to this space because we care about kids. We aren't traditionally a criminal justice funder, right? But that was how we found our connection into this space. And I would really implore and urge other funders to figure out where they fit into the criminal justice reform conversation. I think Clean Slate is a fairly easy entry point, particularly if you care about kids, if you care about safety, if you care about job access. All of those things fall into this space. So really this is, I think, an opportunity for funders to step into this conversation around justice reform in a low entry or a low barrier way to get into that conversation, and not only provide our financial resources, but our power of influence. And I think that philanthropy also holds to be spokespersons and be able to move and shape conversations in the communities in which we reside. So I really, really implore philanthropy to get involved in this piece of the conversation as a way to enter into justice reform.
And Sharon, you're going to get the final word, which, I don't know, could be dangerous.
I promise to make it short. I am so thrilled that we implemented this law in Pennsylvania first, because we are not usually the trailblazers, but we did it this time. And I am so excited to see what the rest of you do with this, because this is a model. This is not the way it has to be, the way that we did it. I'm really excited to see how many of your states decide to expunge rather than seal. I'm really excited to see how many of your states include some felonies. There are so many ways to go with this model. I think it's a new paradigm. I think that in 10 years we're going to say, why did it take so long to bring this to our states? And I think that, honestly, it can transform literally millions of lives in this country, and I'm very excited to see that starting.
And those are great words to end on. So please join me in a round of applause for our fantastic panel. Again, for folks who want to get involved, cleanslatecampaign.org is there for you with lots of tools and information. We want to hear from you. We want to work with you, and it's really fantastic to see you all here today. So thank you so much for being here, and looking forward to having many more conversations about how we all work together moving forward.